Miles here for the Sewing Connection, Series 14, Program 13. In St. Louis, I saw a crazy quilt by the yard, and as I looked at its colors, I thought of all the garments I had at home in each of these colors, but I really hadn't necessarily thought of wearing most of them together. A vest of this fabric might just be the pivotal piece to unite this skirt with that blouse or that sweater with those pants. It's kind of like an orchestra conductor pulling everything together. Now, I really could, as I looked at this, think, oh yes, I do have that lavender skirt, and that really could go with a green blouse because this vest pulls them together. And I really could wear those green pants with that aqua shirt because this pulls them together. It's almost like playing paper dolls, the way you can mix and match all those separates. I really like to save my things over the years, and as long as I don't change size, I can do that. Or even if I do change size, I can fudge a little and make longer vests and do it anyway, maybe. But it's nice to mingle the old with the new, and so this is one thing that's going to do it. Well, let's take a look at this fabric before I put it into a vest and see how it all works. As I looked at this, I thought this is something we could do easily. All you need to do is decide whether your time or your money is more valuable, because it may take a little time. But here's the piece that I haven't used. This is all I have left. I really used this to the hilt. And what I cut this out of is a pattern that I made from my basic patterner. It's simply the basic front with the hem cut a little different into a point down there. I cut the arm a little lower, the arm's eye, so that I could put blouses on. I cut it away a little bit here at the neck to make a V and cut out extra for buttons and buttonholes at the front. So same thing that I've made several times. Now also this one could have a dart put in it for extra fullness. I opted instead because as I was making the button loops, I had a long piece of this left, and so I thought not only will I make this sort of in a strange little thing as I make the button loops because I had so much of it, but I thought instead of putting darts in the back, wouldn't it be kind of fun to just make little buttonholes, actually little eyelets is what I have here, and weave that in and out and tie the ends in little bows and do something a little different. Everything you make should be a little different than whatever you used that same pattern for the last time, just to make your wardrobe really interesting and to keep your mind alert besides. Well, this crazy quilt down here is, as I looked at it closely, I saw that, well, of course, they put it on a backing. Now theirs is just a really, really lightweight, kind of gauzy fabric. I put mine on something a little stable because if you've ever worked with these silks, you know that they ravel dreadfully. And so to keep it from falling apart completely, I just wanted to use a fusible under it rather than just put it down on top of something. So I did start out with the fusible for the base. And here are some choices you might use for those fusibles. I might use this one, which is just a lightweight, and you can see by the shine that there is a fusible substance to the back. Now this one doesn't permanently stay fused. What happens after you move around and wear it for a while is that it kind of comes loose, and on some fabrics it might show. They might bubble after a while. It's meant to do that. It's meant to come completely free, really. And so that's one choice. Another would be this fusible tricot. This one's a little fuzzy on the right side. That's a thought. Or you might do it directly on fusible fleece. Not if I'm doing clothing will I do that because it stiffens it too much. But I decided out of this crazy quilt that I was making, it was going to be a little clutch purse like I made last program. And so because of that, I fused this directly on that fusible fleece. I wanted it heavy, and this really is too heavy. You wouldn't want to wear this in a jacket or a vest, but it's great for a bag. Or maybe if you're going to do this for some wearable garment, you might want to just put it on flannel. And you have all those choices always. So a lot of it depends on your personal preference, and a lot of it depends on the thickness or the type fabric you use too. So think it through and decide what's going to be best for your particular situation. Well, since this ravels so dreadfully, as I was looking very carefully at theirs, I noticed they did something else. Now, by now, you know I'm not a quilter. I just play like I'm a quilter now and then. And so I really don't know exactly what the rules are, but I suspect with a crazy quilt, it's a little Victorian in feeling, but I suspect they just did it however they wanted to without any rules. Well, if I can peel back this, I see that there is not exactly a seam, but they do have that piece of fabric folded back. And I thought, yes, that's a very good idea to keep those edges from raveling, because they will ravel so dreadfully that you won't be able to just satin stitch over the edge. You need to do something more permanent. So when I was doing this, and this is the first thing I tried, I started just anywhere, it doesn't matter where. I started in a corner, this corner I believe, and I put one down without folding under any edges. And then every successive piece as I went along, going any direction imaginable, I would fold under the edge and press it in place that way. For instance, here I have some that I haven't stitched on yet, and you can see the edge is folded under, so it's still loose, but it's a fold, so it's finished. But I'd press it then, and here also I've tucked under the edges and then pressed it. And this one I haven't pressed down at all yet, so it's still just to be done, but you can see how those edges are falling apart, and it better get pressed pretty quickly or I will have a problem with it. So anyway, this is how I started, in one corner. Some people might start in the middle and move out from that. Some people might have definite rules for themselves as to what size or what shape the scraps are. Mine are just any shape. I just cut corners off. Maybe they're triangles or squares or whatever was handy with the scraps I had of silk, because this one's all silk. Another one that I'm doing is going to be all suede, and again, it's going to be a bag. So here's this one, and it's all fused already. I'm just covering up the joinings there. And because this was suede, synthetic suede, but because of that, I didn't want any extra bulk by, of course, turning back edges. There's no sense in it. It's not going to ravel. So I just wanted all those edges to butt together. Therefore, on this one, it isn't too wonderful a design, which it doesn't have to be. It still turns out to be really fun when you get finished, whether you're artistic about it or not. And so what I did with that is, first of all, draw it on a piece of fusible substance with the peel-off paper on it. And this, just draw whatever design. I just did a lot of curvy lines everywhere, just for no rhyme or reason. And then after I had this all drawn, then I would cut them apart, because I wanted to fuse them to the suede and then peel off the paper and then fuse it to a backing. So this is what I've already done on this, but I'll show you when we get back to the ironing board how that can be done. I'll just take this suede with me to do that. And the fact that you cut those pieces apart, then it's just like putting a jigsaw puzzle back together, and they will, of course, fit exactly, because there's no other way they can. You cut them apart. Now, after I get that all finished, I want to cover it, and what I chose to cover those raw edges with to make it look complete are little strips of suede here. And a couple ways you might think of doing that. I might cut those with just a plain blade, just a straight cut. That would be one choice, and that's what I've done to this green one, so it's just straight. Or when you have some of the pretty cut-out blades of various sorts, here's a pinking blade that looks pretty, or maybe a wave blade, whatever. This one's cut with a pinking blade, and this is also suede, but that's what I've done to cover this up. Just to soften the look a little bit, I decided to use that jagged edge of a pinking blade on it. Here's a wave blade that I used on something else, so any of those would be a good choice, and all that you can do very easily, just using a straight edge there, and you're cutting matte and doing that. Also, after I get through pressing this, we're going to go over to the machine, because of course I noticed that on this crazy quilt there's a lot of stitching after you have it all down in place. Then you do some fancy stitches here and there. And way back when this first started, I suspect a lot of that fancy stitching was used to not only strengthen some of the weaker parts, but just to provide a little entertainment. Before I leave here, I wanted to take another look at this, and notice how I have a couple of cuts in this for good reason. One way, lengthwise, there is no stretch in this suede. So if you cut it that way, you aren't going to be able to go around curves very easily. It won't curve, it doesn't stretch. The crosswise does have considerable stretch. And this is the way you want to cut it. Whether you're using a wave blade or whether you're cutting it straight, this way it can curve around and give you a much better job. So think about that before you cut any of those covering pieces. And we'll just go on over here and do some pressing. Now with this one, did I bring a piece of suede to press? No, I left it on the table, so let me grab it. And let's do this gray one. And Be sure that you have the back side of it. So the back side is always less lively than the front side, so you can tell pretty easily by looking at it. Be sure you also have the business side of the fusible down on this, and you really can just fuse this, and you won't have to do anything like putting a press cloth on it or on the back side. Always put a press cloth on if you're on the right side. I'm going to cool that off a little bit before I pull off the paper. And then we can fuse that on something. Here I have a piece of flannel, because this would be another good choice to just fuse that on flannel. And if that's the case, then I will want to put a press cloth on top of this. And also what I need is a pair of shears, because I need to cut that out before I fuse it. So let me quickly cut it out right on the line, right on the edge of it, because remember, I want to fit this puzzle together after I have it finished. And so once I've cut it out right here on the line, and once I've peeled off the paper, then you would just start wherever, and it was going to be at one corner. And so I would put it there on the corner and go ahead and fuse that once the press cloth is on top. And so that's going to be permanent. Or maybe you want to put all your suede there before you do any fusing, just to make sure you have the pieces in the right place. So that's another consideration for it. And so that's what we'll do with this suede. What we'll do with the silk then is just fuse on this last piece, and then we'll go over and do a little stitching, because of course the stitching is the most fun part of it. I hope that I have this piece of silk big enough. Maybe if I move it a little bit, it'll cover all the raw edges. And if it doesn't, it's not a big deal. It misses by a little bit there, and that's okay, because that's going to be in the seam allowance anyway, so I really don't care that it misses slightly. But notice how I already have the edges pressed under here before I put it down. And notice also, these are raw edges that I have on the fabric that's already down here, because I didn't want any extra bulk. There was no sense in pressing under all the edges, just those that are going to be on top. Those are the only edges you have to have pressed. And it's going to just slightly, I'm going to trim it off, just so that it won't get on the iron since I have too much there. And it's okay, I'll just make my whole bag a little bit shorter right here across the top edge, and it won't make a bit of difference. What's a 1/4 inch there between friends? Okay, no press cloth this time, because I'm just doing this on the silk. It isn't going to be harmed in any way by the pressure or the steam or the heat, and so it's fine to just press that. And once we have it pressed, and I've moved this around a little, I'll just slightly press some more here to get this down tight, and then we're ready to do some stitching. Okay, just in case I need these, I'll bring them along. And now what we're going to do is stitch and make some decisions here too. For one thing, what color thread are you going to use? Because there are so many choices all over. And so I'm seeing a whole lot of threads here that would go very nicely. I don't have any purples, but I have a lot of reds and red oranges and pinks. And what I already have in the machine is a bright pink that I've stitched the rest of this with. So I'll just continue with that. Notice also how you can these days get different weights of thread, and these are all embroidery threads. They're all rayon threads, rayons, acrylics you might use, but there are different weights. For instance, anything with this white top is 40 weight, and that means that it's a little bit finer. And if it's a heavier thread, it has a black spool on it, and that means it's a 30 weight. The numbers go in the reverse. So make sure that you do get whatever you want to, whether it's the lighter or the heavier. I'm using the heavier just because it fills in nicely and it really gives a good heavy design. So I want to also put on this a foot that will allow that thread to be underneath and to be bumped up a little bit. So I'm going to put on this foot that allows that to happen, that has a little channel underneath, instead of the regular flat multi-purpose foot. And then I also want to choose a stitch pattern. So this is going to be ordinary sewing, but I'm going to go into some of the really heavy designs. So I'm going to put the ordinary sewing, but the advanced designs, the bigger numbers, because I really like that heavy look of it. Any of these from 41 to 49 are going to be just terrific. Any of the next grouping also would be really nice. We'll pass it on to those. Any of these, they're all heavy designs, and so they would all look very nice on it. I think for the one I'm going to do here, where will I do it? Here on the red. I think I'm going to do, what I was trying to do is vary the designs here. And if I have this one geometric, straight lined, then I'll do a wavy one here maybe, or a round one, something that varies it a little bit so that each one does look a little bit different. So on this one, I'll just do a wave, and actually that wave is 56. So right there, I'll push the wave, and you can see it says decorative. It also says X1. If I would push X1, it would be a little wave. I'm going to push that again and make it slightly elongated, and it turned up X2. So let's see what X2 will do. And okay, that ought to be about a good place. And I also am going to want to stop when I get to the corner so that I can pivot easily. So I'll push the needle down position, and so that I can pivot without having to eliminate the use of my hands on the fabric. I'm not going to, because the machine's moved too far back right now, but there is a knee lever which really does help, so that you can just lift the foot with your knee and not have to take your hands off. I don't have anything delicate or dangerous here. It's all right if I move my hands. But see how I'm now making a little bit longer wave, and I also am seeing just a little bit of the bobbin thread come up. So I'm going to loosen the thread tension here enough so that it won't pull up the bobbin thread at all, because I don't want to see white on top. I just want to see my pretty pink thread on top. So I have a slightly elongated. And if you decide you want it even longer than this, at this point I'm going to have to wait till I get to the corner, and if I wanted to elongate it more, I could do that as I turn, and it wouldn't be as noticeable. It'd be very noticeable if you do it right in the middle of a line, so it wouldn't be too good an idea. Okay, I am at the corner, and let's stop down there and raise it. Oh, I like the way it's going, so we'll just leave it that way and do the next side. And the stitching is actually very quick and easy, and it's fun to use all those different decorative stitches that you have at your disposal. So it's just a matter of deciding which thread's best and which stitch is best. And you're ready to go. While I'm doing this, I'd like you to see another crazy quilt on a model. And what this model is wearing is just, well, obviously ready for a holiday party. And who this is Kathy Engelmeyer from St. Anne, Missouri. And her Christmas outfit is just really pretty. It's in green velvets and metallics. And just notice all the different stitches she has used on hers and the braids that she's used there. And look at the metallic fabrics as well as the metallic threads. And then of course she has some bows and buttons and beads and dangles and this and that, because usually those things are added to a crazy quilt. Well, I haven't gotten that far yet, but when I do get as far as those operations, I have a feeling that I also better add some. So I already have taken out of my button boxes some of the things that I just might put on this to add to it. Now I also think that I might like to just put a little decorative stitching in metallics, and so that's a possibility. When I went to these metallics, I wanted that to be, a lighter, just a filigree look, rather than the heavy thread that I have on the borders as I stitched everything together. So I dialed another stitch on that, or touched another button, and that made a filmier stitch, because I didn't want that as solid. I didn't want it to show up as much. But on that, I'll probably take some buttons out of my purple box and sprinkle them on there and see what they look like in one place. And I'll take some buttons out of my red box and put those someplace else and just group them around here or there and do some fun things with it. So realize that the one I'm wearing, the vest I'm wearing without anything else on it, is possibly a work in progress. I just might do more to it before I get finished with it, because things like that you can add at any point. There's never a time with a crazy quilt, I suspect, when you say, I am completely through, this is it. You can keep on going forever. Okay, well, let's do just a little bit of stitching here, and I'm not going to do much because I'm really not going to bother to change thread. I just want to show you how easy it is to go around curves as long as you have cut that suede on the crosswise. Then it's going to work real easily. Now, here are some other ideas down here on the table that you might use besides using the suede strips. You could, for instance, use some of these pretty heavy novelty yarns of various sorts, the yarns and cords, and you could use these by sewing over them, maybe a decorative stitch over them, but couching them on in some way, stitching over them so that they would obscure the joining so that it would look finished with them. So there are always lots and lots of choices, and just play with all the things at your disposal to see what you would like. Now, when you put something solid like this on, you have to think where you are and what you're doing, because if, for instance, I would right now put it here, then I wouldn't be able to cover the end of it as I put this piece on or this piece on. So this is not the one to go right now. What I want to do right now is any piece that will have something cover it later. And this is my only possibility right here, because it'll have something cover that, and it'll have something cover this end. So this is the only place I can put this piece of suede. And of course, to put this on, I want to get back to a straight stitch. So I'll just get back there to straight stitch, and because this is a suede which can take bigger stitches, and besides I'm going to rip it out because it's a color I don't want, so I made them real big, and I'm going to do a little stitching on there just to show you how easily that suede turns. Now, there's no reason to glue stick it down, to pin it, to do anything. All I'm trying to look at now is to see which is the right side, because the right side has a little more life than the wrong side, and this is right. Okay, you can rub it back and forth, and if it roughs up a little bit, that's probably going to be the right side, which is a little bit prettier. And I'll just put it here where the next one will cover it up, and do a little stitching there, and it's simply straight stitching. And you can stop whenever you want to, needle down position, so that you can adjust. And I want to adjust this a little bit more. And all it's doing is covering. So every time you stop, just get it adjusted, but you can see how easily it curves, the fact that it was cut on the crosswise, and you really couldn't do this without little wrinkles if you'd cut it on the straight, so it's a definite consideration, and it's going to be much nicer. Well, since I really don't want the pink thread on this, I'll take it out and get back to it later. I'll leave plenty of thread here so I can just pull it and rip it out very easily. But a couple new bags I'm going to have next time you see me, and I'm going to have them really crazy by then, by the time I get everything on top. Now, you saw me do something else that really is kind of like a crazy quilt back in Series 11, and what that was a little miracle stitching that I've done here. And that's just a wonderful little gadget. All it needs is a couple little things. I'll show you the box it comes in, but all it needs is something that will keep the yarn up close to the needle as I'm stitching. And what I'm doing is just zigzagging, couching all this yarn on. And you can see that these, in this case it was fields, plowed fields, as I saw them out of a plane window. But with this, it was just butting the edges together, and you don't even have to cover completely, because this yarn is going to cover enough area that it doesn't matter how it looks. It doesn't matter if they overlap or don't touch at all. But what this is just zigzagging. Monofilament thread is what you want to use here, because you don't want to see the thread. You just want to see the yarn that you have couched down underneath. But it's a foot like this that's in the box, and that keeps the yarn right next to the needle as you do the zigzagging. And it's a little cup that goes on the needle screw to keep the yarn over there close to, and then it makes the job very, very easy. So if I've given you a few ideas, I hope you'll try a little of this of your own. Now, this is something I didn't try ever before. I've never done a crazy quilt. This is something you very often see Oh, ribbon flowers embroidered on, a lot of that goes on crazy quilts. So there are a lot of possibilities here. And any kind of fabrics, of course, can be used. So you aren't limited by the silks or the suedes that I used. Cottons here will work very nicely. Anything can work. You just decide what's going to be the best for you. That heavyweight thread is so pretty. There's something else I've been wanting to try, which I haven't yet, so I'm just going to put this under and move it ahead to that grouping and see what it looks like. How about these hearts, since I have a pretty pink going here? See what that looks like. Well, it's a fun design too, and it goes rather fast, and it fills in so beautifully with this thread. I can see a whole lot of uses for this, or any other design that's on here. Too many of those designs we don't try as often as we should, and it spawns a whole new idea for something we haven't done before. When I get this finished, I'm going to put a big button on for a fastening, because I also have some pretty buttons that just go. One that I especially see right now in my pink thing for this pink purse is, how about that big chunk of pink ice? Wouldn't that go just right on my silk crazy quilt? Go a little crazy yourself and add some spice to your wardrobe, incorporating a lot of the ideas I've been showing you. This was the last program of Series 14, and I'm now off and running to bring back more fresh thoughts for you. The goal of the Sewing Connection is to connect you with other sewers who can inspire your work, to bring you techniques that elevate your quality, and to convince you that you really can do it. If you have fun with the Sewing Connection, write the management of this station and ask that they air Series 15. It's going to be coming up soon. Until then, I'm Shirley Adams, who, like you, just loves to sew. Enjoy.